second graders, Mrs. Elkema here. I'm looking forward to continuing our read alouds for the next few weeks with you through video. So please remember some of the things that we've been learning about the last few weeks in class, such as compare and contrast, and all of the different characteristics of folk tales and fables and the lessons we might learn from them. Enjoy! We're going to start by reading the story called Stone Soup by Marcia Brown. Stone Soup, an old tale, told and pictured by Marcia Brown. When I look at this title page, I see that it says, an old tale. This reminds me that fables and folk tales are stories that were written a long time ago and have been passed down from generation to generation. Three soldiers trudged down a road in a strange country. They were on their way home from the wars. Besides being tired, they were hungry. In fact, they had eaten nothing for 2 days. "How I would like a good dinner tonight," said the first. "And a bed to sleep in," said the second. "But all that is impossible," said the third. "We must march on." Only they marched suddenly. Ahead of them, they saw the lights of a village. "Maybe we'll find a bite to eat there," said the first. "And a loft to sleep in," said the second. "No harm in asking," said the third. Now the peasants of that place feared strangers. When they heard that 3 soldiers were coming down the road, they talked among themselves. "Here come 3 soldiers. Soldiers are always hungry, but we have little enough for ourselves." And they hurried to hide their food. They pushed sacks of barley under the hay in the lofts. They lowered buckets of milk down the wells. They spread old quilts over the carrot bins. They hid their cabbage and potatoes under the beds. They hung their meat in the cellars, and they hid all they had to eat. Then they waited. So far we have met some characters. Think to yourself who they are so far. I think so far we have met the 3 soldiers and peasants. The soldiers stopped first at the house of Paul and Francos. "Good evening to you," they said. "Could you spare a bit of food for 3 hungry soldiers?" "We have had no food for ourselves for 3 days," said Paul. Francos made a sad face. "It has been a poor harvest." The 3 soldiers went on to the house of Albert and Louise. "Could you spare a bit of food? And have you some corner where we could sleep for the night?" "Oh no," said Albert. "We gave all we could spare to soldiers who came before you." "Our beds are full," said Louise. At Vincent and Marie's, the answer was the same. It had been a poor harvest and all the grain must be kept for seed. So it went all through the village. Not a peasant had any food to give away, and they all had good reasons. One family had used the grain for feed. Another had an old sick father to care for. All just had too many mouths to fill. What is the soldiers' conflict, and how are they attempting to resolve this conflict? Think about that. I think the soldiers' conflict is that they want food, but they can't have any because the peasants won't share. The soldiers also want a nice place to rest, but again, the peasants won't share. How are they attempting to resolve this conflict right now? Think about that. I think the soldiers are attempting to resolve their conflict by asking everyone in the town for food and shelter. But that isn't working because everyone is saying no. The villagers stood in the street and sighed. They looked as hungry as they could. The 3 soldiers talked together. The first soldier called out, "Good people, The peasants drew near. "We are 3 hungry soldiers in a strange land. We have asked you for food and you have no food. Well then, we'll have to make stone soup." The peasants stared. Stone soup? That would be something to know about. I noticed that the soldiers talked in private and it looks like they came up with a plan. I wonder what they'll do. On this page, the soldiers said we'll have to make stone soup. I know that you can't make soup out of rocks, and you definitely can't eat rocks. So I am really wondering how this is going to solve the problem. "First, we'll need a large iron pot," the soldier said. The peasants brought the largest pot they could find. How else to cook enough? "That's none too large," said the soldiers, "but it will do. And now water to fill it and a fire to heat it." It took many buckets of water to fill the pot. A fire was built on the village square and the pot was set to boil. And now, if you please, 3 round, smooth stones. Those were easy enough to find. The peasants' eyes grew round as they watched the soldiers drop the stones into the pot. Wait a second. I thought the peasants did not want to share. Now I see that they are getting the soldiers a very large pot, water, and helping to make a fire. Why are the peasants helping the soldiers, and how do you know? Think about the answer to that. I think the peasants are helping the soldiers because they want to know how to make soup from stones. "Any soup needs salt and pepper," said the soldiers as they began to stir. Children ran to fetch salt and pepper. Stones like these generally make good soup. But oh, if there were carrots, it would be much better. "Why, I think I have a carrot or two," said Francos, and off she ran. She came back with her apron full of carrots from the bin beneath the red quilt. "A good stone soup should have cabbage," said the soldiers as they sliced the carrots into the pot. "But no use asking for what you don't have." "I think I could find a cabbage somewhere," said Marie, and she hurried home. Back she came with 3 cabbages from the cupboard under the bed. "If we only had a bit of beef and a few potatoes, then this soup would be good enough for a rich man's table." The peasants thought that over, and they remembered their potatoes and the sides of beef hanging in the cellars. They ran to fetch them. A rich man's soup, and all from a few stones. It seemed like magic. How are the soldiers solving their conflict? Think about that. Well, the soldiers keep mentioning food that would taste good in stone soup, and so the peasants are going to get that food to share with the soldiers. The peasants think that the soup is magic, and they don't realize that the soldiers are actually tricking them into sharing their food. I know one characteristic of a fable is that fables have wise characters who follow the moral, and foolish characters who do not. Who do you predict are the wise and the foolish characters in this story so far? "Ah," sighed the soldiers as they stirred in the beef and potatoes. "If we only had a little barley and a cup of milk, then this soup would be fit for the king himself. Indeed, he asked for just such a soup when last he dined with us." The peasants looked at each other. The soldiers had entertained the king well. But no use asking for what you don't have. The soldiers sighed. The peasants bought their barley from the lofts. They brought their milk from the wells. The soldiers stirred the barley and milk into the steaming broth while the peasants stared. At last the soup was ready. All of you shall taste, the soldiers said, but first a table must be set. Great tables were placed in the square, and all around were lighted torches. Such a soup! Oh, how good it smelled! Truly fit for a king. But then the peasants asked themselves, would not such a soup require bread and roast and cider? Soon a banquet was spread and everyone sat down to eat. Never had there been such a feast. Never had the peasants tasted such soup. And fancy, made from stones. They ate and drank and ate and drank. And after that, they danced. At last they were tired. Then the three soldiers asked, is there not a loft where we could sleep? Let three such wise and splendid gentlemen sleep in a loft? Indeed, they must have the best beds in the village. In the morning, the whole village gathered in the square to give them a send-off. Many thanks for what you have taught us, the peasants said to the soldiers. We shall never go hungry now that we know how to make soup from stones. Oh, it's all in knowing how, said the soldiers, and off they went down the road. So as a good reader here, I'm thinking, how does the character finally solve the conflict? The why, the yes, and the story map. I see that the soldiers are not only going to eat the soup, but they ended up going to share and have a feast with everyone. The villagers were providing even more food, such as bread and roast and cider. Everyone in the village had a feast at the end. When I look back at the title, I think, what is the lesson that we learned from Stone Soup? Think about that for a minute. I think of two lessons that I've learned. One, I think that the lesson is important, that we need to share. I think this because at first the peasants did not want to share, and everyone was very worried about the little food. However, after everyone shared their food, they were all able to have a huge feast. Another lesson is that when everyone contributes something small, we can all benefit as a whole group. That means if everyone shares one thing, then together we can make something grand. Thank you for reading Stone Soup with me today.